God bless you, dear ones. Welcome to the Word with Chester. Today we will continue studying the fourth chapter of the book of 2 Kings. In our last study, we read down to verse 17. Today we will begin our reading at verse 18 and continue to the conclusion of the chapter. Before we start reading today, let me give a brief recap of what had just transpired. We're actually dealing in this story with the same people from our last lesson. So let's get a picture of what was going on at that time. Well, the prophet Elijah, he took the same route to and from where he lived to other places, and a Shunammite woman saw him as he went through that region there where she lived, and she knew it was a man of God, so she invited him in to dine with them and have dinner with them, if you please. And they had dinner, and they built a friendship. There was a great friendship there, and so Elijah would stop there every time he would pass through that on his way or going back to where he lived. And the Shunammite woman was saw that he was a man of God, knew he was a man of God, so she talked to her husband and asked him to build a house, build a room on the side of their house, so the prophet would have some place to stay, and furnish it with bed, a table, and a lamp, so that he could see. And the man did this, and Elisha appreciated what they did, because he could stop there and could go in and have privacy, and also relax or sleep while he was on his journey. And so he appreciated what they did. So he asked the Shunammite woman, "What can I do for thee?" And he's offered certain things and talking about greater things. And she just let him know that I have no need of that. She was a married man, and her husband took care of her very well. And she was a married woman, married to an older man, and he took care of her very well. so let's also get the picture. She did not want the natural things, what we would have in our mind, but she did not have any children, because her husband was an older man, and he could not give her children, and that's what her desires were. And the prophet told her, before this time in the season next year, you will have a baby. And it actually happened exactly like the prophet had said. Now, this same baby that we read about in our last time that the Shunammite woman had, he grew up to be a large boy, if you please. He was growing. I can't give you his exact age, but here we find that in verse 18, we'll begin our reading today. And when the child was grown, when he was grown, now he was a big kid now, if you please, or maybe quite possibly a grown man, or early young man at the time. And when the child was grown, it fell on a day. He went out to his father to the reapers. He went out to his father where his father worked. And I remember doing that well when I was growing up. I used to go out to where my dad was doing his work, and I'd ride on the big combines that he used to drive, and all of the large tractors that he used to drive. I'd ride with him. He had me a little spot I could sit up there with him, and while he did his job, and just hanging out with my dad. And so this may have been a similar case. This young man went out with his dad to work, if you please. In verse 19, and he said to his father, my head. And he said, he said to a lad, carry him to his mother. So he said, his head began to hurt. And I want you to get a picture here. That's a severe and something very, very deadly that happened to him. And we'll talk about it. He said, my head. The father told this lad that was working with him to carry him to his mother. Verse 20. And when he had taken him and brought him to his mother, he sat on her knee till noon, and then died. He sat on her knee and then he died. I want you to get that picture. Now, verse 21, and she went and laid him on the bed of the man of God and shut the door upon him and went out. Can you get the picture? The boy had died and she went and laid him on the bed that the prophet sat on. I want you to get the power of God and see the power of God in these stories that we're reading now and know his healing power. Now let's read. In verse 22, and she called unto her husband and said, send me, I pray thee, one of the young men and one of the asses, that I may run to the man of God and come again. Can you get the picture? She sent to her husband, send me one of the asses, and also send me somebody that'll go with me. Send one of the young men to go with me, that I can go to where the man of God is. Verse 23, and he said, wherefore wilt thou go to him today? It is neither new moon nor Sabbath. And she said, it shall be well. Get the picture now. Now let's read in verse 24. And she saddled an ass and said unto her servant, drive and go forward, slacken not thy riding for me, except I bid thee. In other words, you go and you go in a hurry, and don't you even slow down until I tell you to slow down. Now let's read in verse 25. It reads, so she went and said unto the man of God to Mount Carmel. And it came to pass, when the man of God saw her afar off, that he said to Gehazi, his servant, behold, over there, that Shunammite. In other words, he saw her coming, and he sent Gehazi, said, look, that Shunammite, there she comes. Now let's read in verse 26. Run now, I pray thee, to meet her, and say to her, is it well with thee? Is it well with thy husband? Is it well with the child? And she answered, it is well. Can you get the picture? Now she answered, it is well by faith. Can you get the picture? Now she answered, is it well? Knowing that the child was dead. Now naturally we know that it's not well because the child had died. But I also want you to understand that anytime God, when you have faith in God, it's well, regardless to what happens and what you see. It's well. It is well. Now let's read on in verse 27. And when she came to the man of God to the hill, she caught him by the feet, and Gehazi came near to thrust her away, and the man of God said, let her alone, for her soul is bitter within her, and the Lord has hidden it from me, and have not told me. In other words, this the Lord had not talked to me about yet. The Lord hid it from me. Well, get this picture. Sometime the Lord will hide some things to you, from you. you. Even as a prophet, he's not going to tell you everything, but he'll tell you what you need to know. So the prophet Elijah said, Gehazi, because it meant something when a lady fell at a man's feet in that day. I don't know how much research you've done in this matter, but if you remember Ruth and Boaz, she went and laid at his feet. So that had a meaning, and Gehazi was pushing her away. But Elisha just said, no, don't push her away. This is something different here. She's heavy in heart, and God did not reveal to me as yet what was going on, what would happen. God hid that from me, but this is not about what you're thinking. So Gehazi was trying to push her away, and Elisha said, leave the woman alone. Now let's read on in verse 28. And she said, did I desire a son of my Lord? Did I not say, do not deceive me? In other words, she's asking him a question now. She's asking him, now didn't you hear me when I said, don't play with me about this, about a child? Didn't you hear me say that when I said, don't deceive me, or don't lie to me when I talked about the child? Now let's read in verse 29. And he said, and then he said to Gehazi, gird up thy loins and take my staff in thine hands and go thy way. If thou meet any man, greet him not, and if any greet thee, answer him not again, and lay my staff upon the face of the child. Can you get the picture? Elisha telling Gehazi, you take my staff, and while you're on the way, if anybody stop you to talk to you, don't even say a word to them. If anybody try to get your attention or stop you from the journey, don't even talk to them. But take this staff, take my staff, and lay it on the child when you get there. Now let's read on in verse 30. And the mother of the child said, as the Lord liveth, and as thy soul liveth, I will not leave thee. And he arose and followed her. In other words, Elisha was sending his servant Gehazi to lay his staff on the child. And the mother said, no, I am not leaving you, and you going with me. Can you get this picture now? What's actually happening here in verse 31? And Gehazi passed on before them and laid the staff upon the face of the child, but there was neither voice nor hearing. Wherefore he went again to meet him and told him, saying, the child has not awakened. He went back to tell Elisha, the child has not awakened. Now let's read on in verse 32. And Elisha was come unto the house. Behold, the child was dead and lay upon his bed. Can you get the picture? The child is dead and lay upon his bed. Now, anytime that much time transpires, you know that the child must be dead. It can't be a fluke thing to where CPR can work. You hit his chest and he come back alive. The child was dead, because you got to get the picture. They didn't have automobiles that could do 120, 150, 160 miles per hour back in that day. So they had to take an ass, and it took time to get to where Elisha was. It took time for them to get back. So the child was dead, if you please. In verse 33, he went in therefore and shut the door upon the two of them and prayed unto the Lord upon the two of them. Well, the child and himself. He shut the door. Now let's read in verse 34. And he went up and lay upon the child, and put his mouth upon his mouth, and his eyes upon his eyes, and and his hands upon his hands, and he stretched himself upon the child, and the flesh of the child became warm. Can you get the picture? It became warm because his blood started to circulate. Can you get the picture? This prophet laid himself on top of them. Now, verse 35, and he returned and walked in the house to and fro, and went up and stretched himself upon him, and the child sneezed 7 times, and the child opened his eyes. Well, when the first time the child got warm, his blood started to circulating. Elisha walked to and fro in the house, and then when the child did not wake up, he did it again and laid himself on top of him. The child sneezed 7 times, and then he opened his eyes. Now let's read on in 36, and he called Gehazi and said, call the Shunammite, so that he called her, and when she was come in unto him, he said, take up thy son. Can you get the picture? He said, take up your son. He's alive now. Then she went in and fell at his feet and bowed herself to the ground and took up her son and went out. I want you to get that now. What had actually transpired here, the child had a brain aneurysm. I don't know if you know anything about that. I know very well about it. Whether you know it or not, I've raised 4 boys, and I had 2 of those 4 boys, 2 of my sons. They had brain aneurysms, and God healed both of them. So I can understand. I'll just give you a brief picture of what transpired. This happened in my life. This happened to my boys, if you please. One of my boys was beaten the head with a bat and drug off into an alley and left there to die. And somebody found him and called an ambulance. They got him to the hospital, and I was looking for him because he hadn't come home in 4 or 5 days. I put out a missing person on him, and the police found him in University Hospital there in San Antonio, Texas. And well, he had a brain aneurysm. I prayed for that boy, and in 18 days he walked out of the hospital with me. Other boys, he had a brain aneurysm without trauma force to his head. He had a brain aneurysm and got into the hospital. Actually, he was with his girlfriend, and she come and got me, and I went to the hospital where he was, and the doctors diagnosed him with a brain aneurysm, and they were going to lay him there, let him lay there and die. And I told him, no, you don't do that. You get him to somewhere where they can help him. And I covered him over just not quite exactly like Elisha, but I remember this story at the time. I covered him over just like this. I said, in the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, stop the bleeding and let him live. And they took him by ambulance from the town I lived in at that time to Oklahoma City. And that day they couldn't do the surgery. They assembled their teams. The next day, well, the blood had stopped. His headache had stopped on his way to Oklahoma City. But they said we had to go back in and clip that, otherwise he could start again and he'd bleed out. They cut him in his head like a horseshoe and laid his head open and went in and clipped that aneurysm, and they put his head back together with staples. It happened on Tuesday. They did the Thursday on Wednesday, and on Saturday morning he walked out of the hospital with me. So you got to get the picture. God he yet works miracles. He yet works miracles. He yet is a healer, and that's a true story. I want you to know. So God did it for this woman. She healed her son. What a magnificent healing. Now, in verse 38, shall we continue reading? We're going to read about other miracles as we continue reading. In verse 38, and Elisha came again to Gilgal, and there was a famine in the land. And the sons of the prophets were sitting before him, and he said unto his servants, set on the great pot and boil pottage for the sons of the prophets. In other words, you cook this food now, cook the pottage for the sons of the prophets. There was a great famine in the land, and one went out into a field and gathered herbs and found wild vines and gathered from it wild gourds. His lap full, and came and shred them into the pot of pottage, for they knew them not. Can you get the picture? He went out and he just saw something that looked good and cut it in and brought it in and put it in the pot. Now let's read on. So they poured out for the men to eat. And it came to pass, as they were eating of the pottage, that they cried out and said, O thou man of God, there is death in the pot, and they could not eat the pottage. There's death in the pot. In other words, this is poison now. It's poison because whatever bush or plant he went and got this from is poisonous. Now let's read on in verse 41. But he said, then bring meal, and he cast it into the pot. And he said, pour out for the people that they may eat. And there was no harm in the pot. Can you get the picture? God took the poison out of the pot. He took the poison out of it. The prophet put meal in, and he took the poison out of it. And the men could eat this. It was a famine in the land. Can you see that the food was in short supply? And so God, he can take what you have, regardless of what happens to it, and make it all right for you. I hope you can get this picture. Now, verse 42. And there came a man from Baal Shalisha and brought the man of God bread of the first fruit, 20 loaves of barley and full ears of grain in its husk. And he said, give unto the people that they may eat. Can you get the picture? He brought to the man of God his first fruit, the first that he got out, and that was an offering there. He brought this offering to the man of God. Can you get the picture? Or some people say his tithing, but yet there actually is a difference between tithing and first fruits, because they were actually two different offerings, if you please. But yet he brought the first fruits of what he had to the man of God. He brought them to Elisha. And Elisha said, give it to the people here so that they may eat. In verse 43, and he and his servants said, what should I set this before 100 men? And he said, give the people that they may eat, for thus saith the Lord, they shall eat and shall have some left. In other words, a miracle was wrought, because what he brought was not enough to feed all of the people there. What he brought, and God worked a miracle so that all of them can eat. 100 plus, 100 more men, if you please. All of them could eat and be filled. And then there was some left. Can you get the picture? In verse 44, so he set it before them, and they did eat, and left some according to the word of the Lord. Can you get the picture? Everybody did eat. There was some left, and they left some there. The preacher, in other words, God is also going to take care of him. He doesn't give everything away. He gave so that all of them could eat, because God's hand was in it. He multiplied it to where it was enough for all of them to eat. And there was some left so that Elisha would have it and he would have enough to sustain himself. I want you to see the miracle working power of God. He is so real. Well, my dears, you may not believe it, but God can do this same thing for you. I know I will never teach anyone to go off the deep end and be fanatical. What I'm teaching you is to always trust God. When your back is to the wall, God can and will work for you. He's done it for me more than one time. God has did many things for me. I have that testimony, but yet I know God is not just don't just love me. He love you too. He'll do the same thing for you. We may not walk in that anointing that Elisha walked in, but yet the love of God is there for you. All you have to do is believe him, trust him, and he will work things out for you in your life. God is so real. He's so powerful. He is awesome. And all he wants you to do is have faith in him and trust him and watch him do a work for you. I love you, my friends. I love you with the love of the Lord. Well, I feel led to do this. Let me do it. If anybody would like to accept Jesus as your personal Savior, I want you to repeat after me. Jesus, come into my life. Forgive me for my sins. I'm sorry for the wrongs I've done. I believe that you died and you shed your blood for me on Calvary cross. I believe that with all my heart. I believe that you were resurrected from the dead. I believe it. I'm speaking it. If you said that little simple prayer, God did save you. All you have to do is believe it and watch him work miracles in your life. Well, my dears, I love you. I love you with the love of the Lord. God bless you.